Okay, so hello everyone. So thank you for joining us today. My name is Rachel and I am the marketing manager for Asia here at Acquia. So today's presentation is called Guide to Using a High Value CMS for Personalization. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. If you have any questions for us, we are saving some time at the end. So please be sure to use the Q&A and chat windows to submit your questions and we'll bring them up at the end. The presentation is being recorded and we will share it with you at the end of the session. We have with us today Tony Peters, our pre-sales lead for Acquia Asia. Tony is a passionate technologist with experience in customer data platform design, management, and deployment. As the pre-sales lead at Acquia in Asia, he interacts with enterprise organizations and helps align IT strategies with direct business goals. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Tony.
Hey, thanks a lot, Rachel. Great attendance again. Thank you very much for joining part 2 of our series on here. So this is part of a 4-part webinar series. We're on our second part now. The first part was just covering the digital maturity model, an overview of that. We do have a recording of that. If you were unable to join on the last one, the link for that will be sent out as a follow-up for this one. This session is going to cover more focused around the CMS, your business's voice, how to get started on that, and then ready for the future in terms of things like personalization. The third part is going to be covering how we can broaden that across the rest of the digital experience, things like one-to-one communications, bringing personalization and segmentation in, and trying to really broaden that voice for your different customers. And then our fourth part is looking at how a CDP can come in and really unify all of these different channels, get those learnings and understandings, and then really help you move forward in these new digital ages and customer experience times. All of this is underpinned by a digital maturity ebook that we pushed out. It gives a nice little overview. Again, we will send out a link for that. You can take a little QR code picture now if you want on the screen, but we'll send out a link that you can go and have a look in your spare time. So just a very, very quick recap of where we were from last week and following on from today. We were looking at that digital experience model. So in terms of maturity, you'll start off with your own voice. You'll start then to move forward in terms of say, okay, we want to broaden across these different channels and unify that voice, give a consistent messaging. We'll then start to do some segmentation. We'll start to then use that segmentation and have that voice for individual messaging, for one-to-one communications and campaign orchestration. And we'll start then to have learnings and analytics and bringing data together to really sort of like give that a nice steroid boost, and then try to really have that messaging tied up between online, offline, different channels, predictive modelings and things like that. Now we know you can't really run before you can walk, so it's all part of that maturity modelling. In our last session, we covered an overview of how people and processes are very important to that and the way of thinking. And on this session, we're going to really concentrate on that level 1. So really getting that, that basis together. And really getting that foundation moving forward. As a quick recap from the last session, just to give us a basis of moving forward, some of the key takeaways that we saw is making sure that you align that business user maturity with senior management pain. So understanding what's keeping people awake at night in terms of your bosses, the leadership, the C-level, the board, and making sure that everything you do and the energies you put in moving forward are always aligned to those. Don't get fixated on business as usual. So when you're moving forward, making sure that you're not always doing the same thing, or you're not going to give yourself a chance or give yourself a time and resources to be able to do things like personalization, testing, campaign management and things, because you're still looking at the past moving forward. And we'll talk a bit about what business as usual pitfalls moving forward today as well. And our third one we looked at is about being honest. So when you're doing your appraisal of where maybe you've got some failings or where you need to be able to pivot, to be able to transform, to be able to move forward, don't be afraid to be honest with yourselves. There's no point in wallpapering over the cracks that you might have, because you won't be able to move forward and won't be able to get better at things if you don't acknowledge where you are properly. So we're going to move into the content of today's session, which is about really focusing on that CMS, focusing on that. We're going to start off with the website, things like mobile apps and things. We're going to talk about getting your voice out there and a nice foundation for moving forward. So I want to bring a bit of an analogy now of a new car. So think of your new website launches. You've got a brand new, shiny new car. It's great. You want to show it off. So you might park it in front of like a some nice rock formation on a beach or something like that. Nice sunset. Take a picture. Do a press release. And go, look, this is great. Look how it drives. Look how it looks. It's wonderful. It's really, really nice. But quite often we see problems such as the platform isn't as usable as we thought it might be. It's not really doing what we need to, and we can find that it starts to stagnate. So this great car that you've set up, you put all this investment in, it kind of gets left to rot a little bit. Now, why is this happening? This is happening over and over and again with many of our clients and many of our businesses that we see. And it's not necessarily just a CMS or website. It's actually with a lot of different technologies that we see going forward. So some of the things I talk about today can be applicable to other platforms as well as part of that digital experience. So I'm going to move on to a bit of a poll now, and I'm going to bring up a poll that talks about has your organization invested in a platform that ended up not being usable by the business? So have a think and be honest and think, have you invested in a technology and found actually it's not really usable after you've been sold this? So I'm going to give you a minute, have a little think, and be honest and just say, look, have we invested in something nice, shiny new toy, so to speak, and at the end of the day, it wasn't really usable by the business units? So let's have a look. Okay, we've got the answers, some people flowing in. Okay. Give it another 20 seconds or so. It's like watching a horse race from my end. Okay, so I'm going to finish up now. Thanks a lot. There was a really good turnout on that poll. But what I've actually seen here is actually, let's see, we've got about 60% of people said yes, and 40% have said no on this. Now, the ones that have said no, you've either got great procurement processes, you're actually selecting technology vendors well, or you're not moving forward. It's a we do see this, but the people who said yes, we see this quite often as well. People are investing in technologies, especially when you make a large investment on platforms that are very configurable. Some of that configuration is not quite set up, ready for the business. So we do see this moving forward. And if we go back and focusing on the CMS side of things, let's have a look at a typical type of developer flow or implementation flow of this. Now, of course, we set up with things like the designers come in, they set up the brand, they set up the mock-ups, and then we start moving into that developer phase. So on a platform such as Acquia, something like that, or Drupal, you're obviously going to have some sort of custom code there. You're going to have these modules you're going to implement. There's going to be integrations. Then your content starts going in, etc. But what's all this for? All of this custom code and things like that, if it's not going to be set up for the business users to be able to use properly. If you're going to invest in a technology that needs a lot of configuration, a lot of setup, and very unique ways of working that you have, it needs to be set up for business users to be able to use. Otherwise, what is this investment for? It needs to pay off. And why does this happen again and again with many of our customers? I mean, hopefully it doesn't happen too often with you, but we do see it happen. If it hasn't happened in the past, it could well happen in the future as you move forward. One area where we see this is because people don't communicate properly. And so quite often it's not the client's fault. It's quite often to do with sometimes the people don't know what they don't know. But we also see that a big problem with this is that there's sometimes too much focus on customer experience. Now, this is a bit of a crazy thing to say sometimes, because isn't this all about customer experience? Isn't that the point of why we're doing all of this? Well, yes, absolutely. But too much focus on that CX can sometimes leave the business user experience of actually doing the content management or actually using the platform as an afterthought. Now, if you think about it, we'll go back to that car analogy. Think about someone, you've got that great new car, it looks great, it photos really well, but you get it on the road and someone's actually fixed that steering wheel and it doesn't actually move. It's not very usable, is it? So we've got to make sure that communication between the business users and the implementation teams are absolutely there. And this is really, really important, isn't it? Because if that platform is not usable, it's just going to sit there to rust, so to speak. And we have to think about what we have here. So we're looking at implementing on top of a platform, not out of the box software. We're talking about implementing on a platform. And we're all different. We're all special in our different ways. So for instance, someone like Singapore Airlines is going to have a different use case, a different setup, and a different way of working from someone like Singapore Exchange. The platform needs to be built on top of to the way our businesses work. It needs to be built to cater for our own customers and prospects. We're going to have different segmentations. It's going to be built for our own unique business challenges and goals. And remember, I want to say it again, but you're building on top of a platform. It will be implemented for you. Now, the problem is, if we go to our implementation partners or our own development teams or our own setup guys and say, I want a website, which, okay, it's a very, very high level blanket statement here. But if you start going at a really high level and just saying things like this, it's what's someone going to build you? They're going to build you something about like quite generic and how they think you want to work, and quite often making the same mistakes as before. And this is where we can very much fall into that trap of business as usual. And yet again, I've brought that up like I did with the last session, is that business as usual. But this is a slightly different way, because this is business as usual of actually working with that particular tool, such as in this case, a CMS. Now, there could be a very good reason about why you are changing and re-platform or looking at a new vendor. And that's probably because that CMS platform is not being able to deliver for you in the future. And quite often it could be that you're unable to manage multiple sites, you're unable to spin up campaign landing pages or microsites quickly, or you can't edit the content properly, you can't do personalization and things like that. Now, if you keep thinking about how you've worked before, it's probably because the technology has limited you in some way. So if you think about things and how you want to work in the way that you've worked before, you're going to have the same problems. And there's a very good chance that the system is going to be set up in the same way as how you were working before. So what has been the point in this exercise? You're going to have a very stagnant site again. So when we look at setting up our CMS, setting up our platform, setting up our new website, we cannot think about the ways we've been working before. We want to think about what is possible with that technology and move forward. Remember in our last session, and again, we'll send the recording if you weren't able to join, but think about the business goals. Think about the KPIs that you have. Think about the problems and the strategic goals and issues that the board have and want to be able to solve, and have a way of working that go and solve these rather than thinking about how you were working before. And it's very important to realize and always remember that this technology that you're investing in, the CMS platform, for instance, it's not your robot overlord. I actually wanted to use a picture of the Terminator robot and Skynet here, but I thought I might get into some copyright issues within here. So this one looks a little bit more like iRobot. But anyway, I wanted to put this up there because quite often people feel like they are being held hostage by the technology they are using. That shouldn't be the case. When you're working with a platform like Drupal with Acquia, you want to make sure that it's built and configured to the way that you work, because it can absolutely be that way. But you just need to make sure you communicate and understand the goals and how you want to work in the future. So the technology should not be driving how you work. It should absolutely be the other way around. Always remember this, and there's always a way to do something. So We thought about how we want to work. We thought about, okay, we want to make sure it's implemented by the ways that we are working. We want to make sure the technology is working for us, not necessarily against us. And I know we never go into a project thinking about that, but quite often it does end up like that. So just want to make sure we bear in mind and always think that we want to be working how we want to work, and it is possible. You just need to communicate properly. So we've got that set up, but remember, this is just the beginning. So we have our platform. We have a platform, hopefully in the way that we want to work, and that helps us realize our business goals. But we're going to need to be able to pivot. We're going to need to be able to transform in some way, shape or form, because we don't know what is coming around the corner. So really think of this as a foundation. Think of this as a great start. And I always like to think of this when it comes down to CX design or UX design, is that all of the experts in the world in terms of UX and things like that, they do come up with excellent work, design, and we've got a few of our great partners on the webinar today, and they deliver things like great CX experiences and things like that, but they are just a great start. Okay, they tend to be at the beginning, and the launch of your new site is almost like a one voice fits all, isn't it? So you want to be able to then say, okay, as you go on that maturity, you want to be able to then, okay, speak to more different audiences, speak to different segments, update your content and change because of circumstances. Look at the amount of change that businesses have gone through this year alone. They've gone through things like COVID, people working from home, more online shopping, lower yield in terms of traditional advertising. Lots of different changes have happened, and you need to make sure the technology can move with you. Any solution should allow you to pivot quickly. This means that be able to adopt new channels quickly, enhance your content strategy to meet customer expectations, and any solution should have the tools to help everyone who plays a role in the life cycle of content, developers, operators, and marketers. So this is something we need to be able to bear in mind, is that we don't want to go down a fixed path and say, okay, we've almost got ourselves caught into a corner here. We want to make sure we're building a foundation with this first step of that maturity model. And it does start with a CMS generally. So I'm going to bring up another poll now, our second poll. And this one is really about, do you feel confident and comfortable in your current state? So I'm going to give again a minute to answer this one, and just want to see your feelings around this. And do you feel confident that your platform, and think of it from a CMS point of view, is ready to pivot as and when needed? So I'll give it about 45 seconds or so and see what you come in. When people are chucking their responses in, which is great. I really should get some sort of countdown music going, shouldn't I? Okay, I'll give it about 20 seconds or so. Okay, give it about 10 seconds, have a think. A couple of you haven't answered, just hit a button. May not be relevant to all of you. Some of you may be partners or something, but you've got your own websites and your business models may change, so hit that as well. Okay, I'm going to end that one there. And okay, we've got some interesting results. It's actually a lot further disparate than I thought the first one would be. So just going to, okay, so we got a yes of 29% and no is a whopping 71% on this one. So I think the word here is really confidence, isn't it? And moving forward, you want to make sure that the platforms you have and the technology you've invested in is going to alleviate or give you that confidence. It's going to alleviate that risk. If you're not confident in moving forward with it, then obviously there is something wrong, isn't it? So this is what we want to say. When you move forward with a re-platform or you want to bring that confidence back, you got to make sure that communication is key. Okay, you want to make sure that communication with the business units, they understand those pains and the things we talked about in the session 1 webinar, is they understand those and can communicate them with both the vendor and the implementation partner. So we have our, hopefully now, we have our platform. We have it set up in a way of working that we want to work with. And as I just mentioned, typically that first iteration is a great start, isn't it? You've launched, you've got great UX, maybe you've done focus groups, you've got great design and things, but it's your first start. It's just the beginning. And that first iteration, what we find is the company shouting about what they want the customers to hear. But chances are it's most likely not what the customer wants or needs to hear from their own voice. These customers are generally diverse, aren't they? Different segments, different buying stages, customer, non-customer, B2B, B2C, depending on your market or vertical. And we know for years now that this voice cannot be a one size fits all. So as you're going to start moving up that digital maturity, you're going to want to do things like personalization. Now, at the beginning, if you've not done personalization before, you're going to start slowly, and that's going to be quite a topic of the next in the series of these webinars. But to be able to pivot, you need to ensure that that platform can pivot with you. It's not going to direct you; it's going to be enabling you to do that. And remember, yeah, that platform is an enabler. It shouldn't be stopping you from doing things. And many, many times we see customers with issues around getting the platform to work for them. And this brings you on to my next part that I wanted to talk about. And that this can also start with the wonderful magic that sales teams, and remember I'm in sales for one of these vendors, that we present to you. And then what a vision it can be. We've got some great demos, and Acquia's got some great demos that we're rolling out ourselves. But the problem is many assume that this, and I'll put in quotes here, magic, is will be set up and included in the final deliverable from the implementation partner. Now, unless you explicitly tell these teams, such as your implementation or dev teams and stuff, that you want certain functionality, they're not going to include it. So never assume just because you saw something in a demo or read about something online, it was going to be set up in that way. And again, we've got some of our partners on the call today, and they're going to want to hear from you as well. And it's not that these vendors are showing you vaporware. Well, I'm hoping that the vendors you speak to are as honest as Acquia, but in many cases, what they're showing you is what we call an art of the possible. So they're showing you things that are what can be done with the platform. And yes, if it's set up and configured properly, the platform can absolutely do these things. But because we have all different types of customers, verticals, and things like that, we want to show you what's possible with the platform. Out the box, it really doesn't do too much, these platforms. If you go for things like a CRM, of course, lots of configuration, because it's down to the way your business works. So what you need to do is be explicit on how you want the platform to work. A tech partner will not implement something out of the kindness of their heart. If you haven't told them, they're not going to do it. Because what they're going to do, you pay them to do something and say, I want a website. Yeah, they'll deliver you a website, but they're going to do it in as cost-effective way as possible for themselves, because they're running a business themselves, aren't they? So a platform such as Drupal with Acquia, this is a shameless plug here, but they can do great things, way beyond any off-the-shelf setup can provide, but that needs to be set up in the way you need. This is hugely important when setting up that foundation and being ready for the future. So I'm going to come back to this slide again. Yes, I know they're not wearing masks, but they are having a coffee, so I think we can let that one by. But communication is key again. Making sure that you talk, not just from the business users working how they want to work, but also with the functionalities and things like that that you require, not just for today, but thinking about the future. Do not be afraid to be explicit in that functionality. And remember, no question is stupid. Just because you saw something in a demo or something, never ever assume that it's going to be included. Try and go in and say, okay, if you've seen something like with Acquia, we have something called the site builder. And then you see that and you go, okay, this looks great. Then highlight it with your implementation and say, I saw something like this. It was great. Make sure it's included in that way. If you have requirements and business goals, tell us. Tell us as the vendor, tell the implementation partner. We're actually there to help, believe it or not. And it's in our interests for you to be successful, you know. There's no need to keep a lot of these things to yourself because what we're going to try and charge you more or something like that. It's in our interest to actually keep you happy. especially with vendors. We're going on things like a recurring revenue model. It's in our interest to keep you happy so we can keep you as a customer. So make sure that you communicate what you need. Make sure you communicate these business goals so we can build that platform and help build from both vendor and implementation partner to the way that your business users need to be able to realize these goals. And then having a platform that's flexible enough to do things like the personalization, etc., for your particular business needs. So I'm going to have a bit of a summary now. The key takeaways I want you to look at before we go into the Q&A session are, so ensure your platform is usable by the business users. Be explicit in what you need. Make sure that you are focusing on, say, okay, what are these business problems? And articulate them. Articulate the strategic objectives and goals so that we can help realize that vision in terms of the platform, make it usable for you. Don't get fixated on existing ways of working. Now, of course, let us know about those existing ways, because we want to find out what works and what doesn't work, because we know that change is difficult. So we don't want to make everything completely new and transform everything at once. But if we understand how you work, but understand the business goals and then forward ways of working, this is going to be important. We want to make sure that this transition is as painless as possible. And then ensure that your output can be personalized and ready for the future. So when we're building and setting up this platform, we want to make sure that it's ready for the future, it's usable, and things like personalization can be done. So when you're talking to your vendor or implementation partner, especially when it comes to CMS, you want to let them know the future states. You want to think about that maturity model and say, in 1 year, 2 years, etc., I want to be here, I want to do this, and make sure the platform is future ready. So it all comes down to, all of these things come down to communication, don't they? Be explicit in what you're talking about. So remember, this is part of a series. Again, we'll send through that link moving forward for both the recording of this session, the ebook, and the recording of the last one. We'll also send you an invite for the next one. That'll be in a couple of weeks' time. That one's going to cover more about segmentation and personalization across not just the channel and the website and the mobile app and things that we're talking about now, but also moving into things like personalizing campaigns and more of a one-to-one conversation. And then our fourth session, a couple of weeks after that, will be how data is going to start unifying both online and offline, if appropriate for your business, and how it's going to really bring a boost on the top, towards the top of that maturity model. So I'm going to open up for some Q&A now. We should have a Q&A box that you have access to if anyone wants to ask any questions, and we'll leave the floor open for a bit. But if we don't hear from you, or you need to drop off, thank you so very much for attending, and hopefully look forward to that. You're looking at that recording or sharing it out amongst yourselves, and look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks' time again. So I'm going to leave the Q&A open for now, if anyone wants to hang on and ask any questions. But yeah, otherwise let us know, and hopefully speak to you soon. Thank you very much.
So if anyone has any more questions, please submit them in the Q&A tab or the chat windows.
Or consumable and compatible with other maturity models that have been around in the market from people like McKinsey, etc. Okay, no problem.
All right, so do we have any more questions from the attendees? Okay, I think we're good. So thank you all for attending. The slides and the recording of this webinar, like Tony mentioned earlier, will be posted on our website and will also be sent to you via an email in the next 48 hours. So please be sure to look out for that. Thank you so much for your time, and we will see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.